So some practices that Catholics today assume to be traditional then are not as long-standing as we thought. Like, could you give us some examples of that?
Aspects of the TLM, if you will, that are assumed to be very traditional, but not so much?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Well, let's see. If we want to go back, if we want to go way back, I would point out just Latin. So the traditional Latin Mass, the Eucharistic liturgy was not originally celebrated in Latin at all. It was celebrated in Greek. That was the apostolic tradition. So to be provocative, um, when the Church mandated that the Western Eucharistic liturgy, what we call the Mass, be celebrated in Latin, that was a rupture, a break with apostolic tradition.
Ooh.
Yeah. So let's say that we go back to around the year 400, and I can't remember exactly what the year was that this decree was made, but what had happened was Greek, being kind of the English of the Mediterranean world at the time of the apostles, in the Western Empire, it had transitioned more and more to Latin being the vernacular. So if you were to go back and let's say that you took the mindset of wanting to be traditional, and you went to the city of Rome, the Mass had always been celebrated in Greek, going back to the apostles. And now a pope says, we're going to take the language of the street, the vulgar language, which is where the word vulgate for the Bible comes from, right? The common language, Latin.
Yeah.
We're going to take this pagan language that we now speak, and we're going to stop with the Greek and the Eucharistic liturgy, and I'm going to impose the Latin. An ancient traditionalist would be outraged
No.
that this disgusting, vulgar, pagan language was now supplanting this Greek. The whole New Testament was written in Greek, as inspired by the Holy Spirit. The apostles celebrated the liturgy in Greek, and now we're going to Latin? And the answer is yes. So then now fast forward, people are disgusted that the Mass is celebrated in the vernacular. We need to go back to Latin. We need to define the Mass by its language, the traditional Latin Mass.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can see when you consider the context here, Latin was mandated as the liturgy, the liturgical language, because it was a vernacular, not because it's apostolic. And then the Romance languages develop, and there's traumas in the West, and Latin fades into the background or becomes Spanish and Italian and French and so on. And we forget why Latin was a liturgical language. It was so that people could understand. The Church's rationale was people used to understand Greek, that's why it was in Greek, and now they understand Latin, not Greek, so we need to go to Latin. But Latin served a good purpose. It united Christians in a multilingual West in their worship, but also eventually restricted people's ability to precisely understand the prayers of the Mass. I mean, of course, you knew generally what could be going on, but not in any sort of specific way.
Right.
So that would be one. Right. Latin would be one. What would be some others? How about vestments?
Oh, yeah.
When people celebrate the older form of the Roman Rite today, what vestment will they often, what form of a chasuble will they often be wearing?
Oh, those Roman little...
Right, the Roman-style chasuble, also called a fiddleback, which is the absolute most cut-down, minimalist version of a ceremonial robe that you can get. Almost a bib. And
oh no.
The chasuble is intended to be a ceremonial robe that would appear somewhat like that which Jesus would have worn in the institution of the Eucharist, right?
Okay.
And in the East, their chasubles are very, very full.
Mm.
Um, through the Middle Ages, also in the West. Let's say that you look at the carved tomb of a pope, and he's represented there as laying down, with his mitre or tiara on, and he's vested. His vestment will be much more fulsome.
Mhm.
Well, the Roman Rite chasuble was almost, as far as I'm aware, a fad from the city of Rome, that then, as depicted in art, you see a lot of Roman associated saints, Ignatius Loyola,
Mhm.
Philip Neri, and so on, wearing it, and you think, oh, this is great. Well, it is great if it's a hot climate because there's hardly anything to it.
Yeah.
But does it, if you were to go back, not, even a very few centuries, and show up for mass as a priest wearing that, everybody would look at you like, what in the
You
world is
forgot to get
that?
dressed.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Chant.
Mm.
You asked about elements that you might think of as very traditional. Chant is very traditional, but chant was re-emphasized as a common practice only in the early 20th century by Pope
Pius.
Pius the 10th. Yeah. Supplanting basically choral masses. Like
Yeah.
Mozart wasn't writing chant; he was
Yeah.
writing, great choral masses, and more or less, whether you like it or not, Pius V's mandate that everybody needs to chant brought an end to that direction in sacred music within the church.
Did
The
you mean
organ.
Pius the 10th? You said Pius the 5th. I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry, Pius the 10th.
Pius the
Thank
10th.
you.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Okay, good.
the organ. Uh, Somebody once told me that the Orthodox make fun of us Catholics because we took an instrument from carnivals and and introduced it into Eucharistic liturgy. You know, Again, taking something vulgar and putting it into the Eucharistic liturgy.
That's what
Could
we're
be
good at.
could be offensive. Yeah. I love the organ. I play the organ. Don't get me wrong. I'm just pointing out, you step back from our context and familiarity. How did the organ get in there?
Yeah.
You know, um, the communion rail
Oh,
is
that's a good one.
really just it is a co Protestant slash Catholic um, liturgical innovation from the 16th century.
Wow.
Very, very curious that, again, if you're stepping outside of the context, Protestant churches had communion rails, Roman Rite Catholic churches had communion rails, unknown in the East, and also unknown in the West before the 16th century. Yeah,
Wow. That is so
yeah.
fun. That blew my mind. But I heard you mention that on that podcast you did with Catholic Stuff You Should Know. And I just
Mhm.
thought, holy cow, never heard that before. Because, yeah, you think, oh, yeah, you just kind of stop thinking because you're like, oh, yeah, this is good. This is old. So it's worth keeping. And you just don't really bother to go, how far back does this really go? And then what
Yeah.
constitutes, like, who's judging old, traditional, etc.? It's like, really, honestly, most of the time when it comes down to it, it's private individuals. They're just looking at something and kind of making like a slapdash guess at it. I mean,
Yeah,
it's kind of bad.
as far as I know, the Jesu in Rome, the headquarters of the Jesuits,
Mhm.
that church was the first to have a low rail as opposed to a rood screen in the
Okay.
city of Rome. It was a new construction, but
Okay.
I don't know exactly when the Jesu was constructed, but let's say it was done in the, around the year 1550 or so.
Mhm.
That's not that long ago, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
Other things would be pews.
Oh yeah.
I mean, bench seating. Uh, that's actually from Protestantism, as far as I am aware. Older Catholic churches, I mean, even into the 1800s, are open floor plans, right?
Right.
Um, let's see.
And the Orthodox are still standing for their liturgies. I mean,
Yeah, right.
They just didn't.
So if you go to an Eastern liturgy, let's say you go to a Byzantine Catholic liturgy,
Mhm.
you're going to see a barrier, the iconostasis,
Mhm.
which does not allow you in the congregation to witness the action at the altar. You can't see the altar at all. You can't see what the priest is doing. And in the West, you had a screen called a rood screen, which was later cut down to become an altar rail. Uh, you have in the East no bench seating, everybody just open floor plan. Go back a few hundred years in the West, exact same thing. In
Ah,
the East, everybody's chanting. Um, that's the form of music. Same thing in the West before the development of choral masses and so on. So there was a lot more similarity. And then in the late Middle Ages and certainly around the time of Trent and after Trent, there was a lot of innovation. An open sanctuary is pretty innovative, actually, if you think about it.
yeah.
In the patristic era, it was open. Then it became closed off. And then
Ah,
post Trent opened up again because the Council of Trent wanted the faithful to see and understand the liturgical action in the sanctuary, not be cut
wow.
off from it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Now,
big switcho.
yeah, so you and I are used to open sanctuaries, right?
Yeah.
I mean, whether you're talking the older form of the Roman Rite or the revised form, we're used to being able to see what's going on. That's only a few hundred years development, actually.
Wow, that so
So,
puts in perspective all the like controversy about which side of the altar is the priest on to celebrate mass, because it's kind of like that's actually a little thing compared to having an open sanctuary or a closed one.
right. And
Wow.
as a Westerner, um, I expect to be able to see what's taking place. Let's say that go back and I'm a layman. If I went to an Eastern liturgy and the priest went, through the doors behind the iconostasis for the anaphora, I think I would be like, well, now what am I supposed to do?
Is this
Because,
intermission?
yeah,
Oh no.
exactly. Because
Oh no.
I don't even know what's going on back there, and in the West, we're used to having that engagement and at least visual participation, visual cues from the priest, what he's doing at this time, and so on.
Yeah.
So
Oh wow. That's so cool. I mean, it just keeping in perspective too that we're only one rite of, is there 23 rites in the church?
I believe there are 23. Yeah,
23. And so the rest are all Eastern and they're all like quite different from the Roman liturgy. And so when we're in this little bubble and we're talking about, yeah, I mean, the Roman rite consists of the most people in the world, but it's like it's only one expression of the Eucharistic liturgy in the world that's approved by the church. And it's so different from all these other ones. So how nitpicky should you get? Yes, do things by the rubrics, take care with things and be reverent. But it's like God is expressing his, how he wants to be worshiped in many ways.
Mhm.
He's not limiting it.
The essentials being the same, but there being diversity in the accidental expressions.
Yeah.
By accidental, I mean in the sense of the technical sense of
Yeah.
accident, not the essence. And
Yeah.
so the some of my best friends are Maronite Rite Catholics, so
Mhm.
they're Arabs,
Mhm.
and uh, and their priest prays the uh, the Eucharistic prayer of their rite in Aramaic, which is the language that Jesus spoke.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting. Yeah, diversity in mode of reception of communion, in the prescribed prayers, in the different traditions, in the form of vesture, arrangement of the church and sanctuary, etc. Those things are not essentials. They can change, and that diversity is, I find it fascinating and beautiful. Um, I do believe that we would say that some of the 23 rites are Western, though, besides the Roman Rite. And I think, for example, of the Carthusian liturgy or the Ambrosian liturgy from
Mm.
Milan, as a for example.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
But
This
the Roman liturgy is super dominant. I believe that 98% of Catholics are Roman Rite Catholics.
Yeah,
I believe, yeah.
that
So
that sounds about right from what I've heard too.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, so obviously it's a big deal. And what's cool about the Roman Rite, I mean, among other things, is you can celebrate it anywhere because it's so simple. And
it's
so it's
relatively
not like you
simple.
gotta, if well, we can't do mass without all the bells and whistles. I mean, I've been to a divine liturgy a couple of times and I thought, wow, can you imagine them doing this every day for daily mass? I mean, do they do
Mhm.
that somewhere? Probably, maybe in big cities or something. But I was like, it's just like you go to mass and it's at least 2 hours long because it just
Right.
takes that long. I'm
It's
like,
an enormous production. I recently had a conversation with a friend of mine who is uh, a Byzantine Rite priest, and he's made that point that that liturgy, let's say the liturgy of Saint John Chrysostom
mhm,
from the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, the cathedral there,
mhm.
it's a cathedral liturgy. It's not necessarily well suited to a little parish church, right? And
Yeah.
it's also not well suited to uh, offering daily
Mhm.
or offering on the battlefield
Yeah.
or an awful lot of things. You can
Right.
have a Roman Rite Eucharistic liturgy that is very elaborate. You could have 4 polyphonic choirs chanting in stereo and incense and 20 acolytes and deacons and all the bells and whistles, or you can give me a Jeep and its hood
Yeah.
and a kit, and I can celebrate and give Jesus to people before the shots start firing. And that's what Catholic priests did in the Second World War in Korea, right? you
Right.
know can't
Right.
So
Can't really beat
I
that.
I love I love the Roman Rite for its allowances, for simplicity, or greater ostentation. I like it for the fact that it is essentially the same as Saint Justin recorded it being in about the year 150 A.D. The liturgy, the Eucharistic liturgy of the city of Rome, is the first to be recorded, and that was by Justin Martyr. So
Yeah.
if you're looking, you say, I want a liturgy that is probably closest um, to how it shook out 100-ish years after the apostles, but before the influence of the imperial courts, after it was made legal and then the official religion of the empire and so on. What did it look like? Justin Martyr is probably a pretty good description, and that's the Roman Rite. And some elements, were had been excluded. Non-essential elements had been excluded from the Roman Rite, but were reincorporated after the Second Vatican Council.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it was a rich liturgy anyway, or, it could be when
Mhm.
it was available in circumstances, but it's like we were actually missing things that had fallen out of use and now we have them restored. So
Mhm.
there's more. One thing my mom will say that I just love it. She just looks at, all the liturgies and everything there is in the Catholic Church for this whole diversity of people and rites. And she's like, it's all mine. Like, it's so
Yeah.
great. It's not like, well, I'm Roman Rite, so I don't care about all that other stuff. Or, well, I only like this one thing, or I think this thing is the best, so we should just have that. It's like,
Mhm.
no, it's just more. It's abundance. It's not like we have to grade everything.